Hey everybody. All right. So we're gonna start our live stream right now with the overview of the component store, some of the demos and stuff. I have Eugene and Santosh with me, with Brendan joining just a touch soon. Yeah. So they'll be helping me go over asking some of the questions. If you have any other questions as well, let them know in the chat so they can also ask them while we're going live, so I can address those questions that you have. But for now, we have interesting agenda. So right now, I'll go over first a little bit about the APIs of the component store, or what the purpose it solves. And then we have 8 different demos of all of the use cases of the component store. So it's going to be exciting stuff. So if anybody has any questions, please leave them in the chat area, and I'll try to answer them.
Yeah. So Brendan is here.
All right. Here's Brendan as well. Hey, Brendan.
Hey.
Hello.
All right. Thank you for
just dropping in.
Thank you for joining. All right. Yep. So I'll start with going with some of the purpose of it and APIs. We could take a look at the design doc if we want to. If there are any questions, I'll probably go over that in a little bit later time. All right. So hopefully everybody can see my screen. Let me just present this. Oops. Obviously. There you go. And here's my keynote. There you go. Except for I would probably want to start with the first one. All right. Yeah. Okay. Let me see. Okay, awesome. Looks like we can see my screen. All right. So let's preview the component store. Let me make sure I can see everything. Awesome. All right, great. Looks like everything's there. Okay, so component store. Why are we creating this at all? What's the purpose of it? What does it solve? I won't go too deep into it because this issue has been around for a while, and there are a few attempts to solve this. But basically what we want is, sometimes we're very happy with our global store and stuff like that, but sometimes we want to have some kind of data or state that is tied to a component lifecycle. What does it mean? So when the component is created, we create this local store or local state of the component and have it there. When the component is destroyed, we want to clean it up, remove it. So every time we come back, we have a clean slate there. The second one is we want to have the complex components that could be easily shareable across multiple pages or across different other components, basically pluggable. And in that way, we want to have them share all of the state with their children and stuff like that. So it should be easily transformable, movable. The other thing is, those complex components sometimes have a lot of children, and those children have other children, so we can have like the entire tree of the components. Sometimes having that in the global store could create some issues, especially if we're having multiple instances of those. So this is one of the other reasons we are trying to create this component store. And I'll go in every single one in details when we go into the demos. We have like 8 demos today. And one more thing that we want is we want it to be reactive and push based. So this is something that again been announced or promoted for a while now. If you want to see, for example, there's Thomas Burleson. I hope I didn't say the right name incorrectly. He had a NGConf talk last year, I think, about the push based. So give it check that out for sure if you want to understand what exactly what I mean with the push based. I'll touch on this during today as well a little bit. All right, but for most part we want to take a look at the APIs, see how it's used and stuff like that. So it has three major APIs. The first one is, and again, this is the particular name we're still deciding on, so your feedback would be very valuable here. But for example, we want to have some way to set the state, right? So we can call it reducer, updater, setter, or anything like that. So we want the component to be able to set the state in this local store. All right, so that's one thing. A second, we want to read the data from the store. So there's another proposal, either selector or select that method. We want to be able to read from the store, right? So when we set, we want to be able to read. That's awesome. And one more thing we want to handle is we want to have a way to handle side effects. So for example, if we're trying to set some data or something happened in the component, we want to react to that and maybe set some data, do something, call APIs, and all that to be tied to the life cycle of components. So basically an effect that is not running when it's not needed. So when the component is there, your local component store would run the effects. If not, it won't be running them. So those are three major APIs, and we'll go one by one each of them. We'll start with the reducer, updater, setter, whichever name works better. We don't know yet. So what does it do? In the demo examples, I called it updater for ease of it. So I'll stick with updater for now. So what it does is it takes basically a function as a callback of a state and some kind of value, and pushes that value into the state, and it has to update the state entirely. So it has to return the new version of this state. And this is the API, then it can take the value itself. But this is the heart of it, right? So it takes the state and that new value and transforms the state, basically maybe pushes this new value or something that does with it. This is the heart of it. And this way we sort of abstract away how we change the state within our local component through multiple updaters. All right, so this is nice. So how do we pass the value? Well, we can actually assign the updater to the function itself and not call the value directly. We could extract it into for example, this updater sets new value to the value property. And we extract it into the set new value something. And that's actually a function that takes new values. And somewhere in the component, we might do the set new value, and we'll pass that new value. So every time we pass the new value, we have change, modify the local state. All right. Everybody can hear me. Awesome. All right. One more thing, it can take an observable. And this is some ideas that were floated around. RX State sort of has one of ways to handle the observables as well. So basically, I think this is a good idea. Sometimes you want to have an observable, and every time this observable would emit a value, it would be pushed into this updater, and it would update. All right. It should be. It's again. Yeah, just unmute yourself. Don't message me. I don't see the messages. It's fine. So just unmute and say, hey, we're kind of interrupted there, and we'll be fine. Awesome. Okay, it looks like we're back live. All right. So where did we end? We probably went over the reducer, right? Of data.
Yeah, we're at the updater, or you're talking about like the API where it passes you the state already, yes, and you just update it from there. At least that was the last part I saw.
All right, awesome. Okay, so selector. So the updater. Okay, so the easy way to pass this would be with the set state, and it's kind of helpful when you use it within the component itself. We'll go to the demo. All right, so selector. So first, when you update the state, you also want to read the state. All right, and the selector or select, again, one of the things we're still discussing is the way to do it. So, oh, it's great selector. So basically, what it does is you can take the state and it's a callback, and we pass the function how to extract that particular value out of that state. And what it does, it returns us an observable. So now we can listen to that observable, and every time the change, there's this change in the state, in the local state, we'll get the observable emission there. For those who've used NGRX before, this is nothing new. One thing I do want to note, and I probably should have highlighted it from the very beginning, this local store, component store, is completely independent of the global NGRX, so it's nothing to do with NGRX store itself. So it's a completely standalone library that fits within one file under 200 lines of code, very small, and provides all those APIs for you. All right, and by the way, this library initially started within Firebase console, and it's been around within Firebase already for over half a year. Kevin Yelko started it, so there's a shout out for him if he's listening. All right, so we can assign the selector to a variable, right? So for example, we have one selector that selects value 1, and then we can also have another selector which selects some other property out of the state. The beauty with the selectors is that you actually can combine them together. So you can have a third selector that combines those two together and does something with those values whenever that value is emitted. So for example, here, whenever selector 1 emits the value, or
Lance.
yeah. All right, we should be back live. All right.
Okay, yeah, I see your slides now.
Yeah, here you go. All right. So what I was saying is that selectors can not only take other selectors, but it can take an observable, and when one of them emits a value, all those values are combined, and we can do something with those values. For example, here we're just doing a simple addition. All right, so selectors are composable in that way. So that was a reducer or updater, selector, and now onto the effect. Similar to the reducer, effect has something that it does in its heart, and that's it transforms values that are being passed into the observable stream. So for example, here we can see that whenever the new value is passed to it, it is pushed into this value observable, and we can pipe and do some of the side effects. What side effects we can do? Well, we can either even update some of the local state of the component state, or we can do API calls and handle the results of those in some way or fashion. The beauty of it is when this component is destroyed, this effect is unsubscribed and completely destroyed as well. All right, so how do we get this value observable? Well, whenever we call this effect, we are passing this new value. We can, again, similar to the reducer, split it in two. So we would get a get new value effect itself, right? And then we can use this effect in any component or multiple components or any place we want, and call, for example, get new value. And every time we call that get new value with the new value here, it would pass that new value into this effect, into this pipe. What's the beauty of it? The beauty of it is that we can completely control how those values are handled, how which flattening strategy is used. Do we start multiple things at the same time, or do we do it in the concat map strategy, which is we queue them one by one and handle them one by one. The caller of it doesn't know and doesn't really care. It just calls get new value in here. This is a value one you need to handle. And internally within the effect, we decide how we want to handle when there are multiple values coming in. So that's the big advantage of this effect. And this is something that I've been missing very much in the service with the behavior subject approach, because every time you call the methods on the service, they are basically each one is triggered and invoked, and I have no way to control that. So for me, that's like always a merge map strategy. Here I can actually control that, and again within the demos we'll see it. The other beauty of it, we can tie multiple other observables to it. So every time we call get new value and pass an observable to it, it would start listening for that observable and pushing those values in. We can call that get new value on multiple observables, and every time any observable emits, those values will be pushed, and we'll see that in the demos as well. So those are the APIs. We can actually also pass nothing to it, and it would basically means the values themselves would be nothing. We can start and trigger our own observable within it. So instead of value $, we can just pass our own observable in, and it would be unsubscribed when the component is destroyed. However, I don't quite recommend using it this way, because we have kind of a better way to do it. We can just use a value pipe, and we can use a take until that is provided by the component store itself. So it has a destroy property that we can listen to, and it will be destroyed when component store is cleaned up. All right, so those are three major parts of it, and now let's try to see the demos. Any questions about those, by the way? If there are any questions, I would be happy to answer them. Oh, things we can address or anything like that. If you want to follow along with the demos, by the way, the links should be in the description of the video. Both the StackBlit and the GitHub I posted just before we started the video.
So one question, you probably see the chat. Are selectors memoized?
So are selectors memoized? They're not. They are distinct until changed, and they are, so that means that if the value is the same value by reference coming in, it won't trigger the new a new observable. It won't limit any value. And they also share replayed internally. So what that means that you can multiple times get that property and subscribe multiple times. They all be getting the same value. Basically, you're not triggering the execution context multiple times. Oh, awesome. There's so many questions.
I think I'll add one more thing to that. I think we were, we already had this like initial component store hooked together, but I think Mike is looking into the issue where we can add some memoization there within this API. So we can look out for that too.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the open questions is there. So we're still discussing if we want to memoize or not. There are benefits and drawbacks. Could it be perceived as a more complicated library, or would it increase the size of it? Right now, one of the highlights of it is like it's really tiny. It's like really, really tiny. Tiny, but very, very powerful, as we'll see today.
Right, and I think that's one of the things we've been at least promoting about like NGRX in general is the surface, the API surface. There are different pieces of it, but working with those things, individual things, is not a lot that you have to memorize for like working with the store, like selector. Like there's only like maybe 2 or 3 things that you primarily work with.
Yeah, that's right. Um, yeah, so those are great questions. Lars asking, you wrap the component store in a facade subclass service, right? Yeah, that's right. We'll see how it goes. We'll see it completely. First, we'll start with where this component store is directly in the component itself, and then we'll see how we can extract it and what other benefits we get out of it. Thank you. All right.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do we, so this component store, does it mean that the global store kind of like is gone, or this is used in conjunction with, because it's kind of like really interesting question, I think. Right?
That's a very good question. Yes, this is a fantastic question.
I'm gonna miss global store a lot. Please don't do that.
So
I'm gonna abuse the mess out of this. I'm gonna put it in the app component and just use it like everywhere. It's gonna be my global store.
Yeah, can we wrap global store in every component and just reuse it?
Those are all good questions. And this is the initial question that I have this question. I got the question. It's probably the second question. First one, is it tied to the global store? And second one, can I use it instead of global store? So for smaller apps, maybe, but the benefits from a global store start really, shine where your app becomes larger, and when you have, shared state used in multiple places throughout the application. So for that, in Firebase we use it, and we've been using nginx Store like forever. For the locally scoped things where it's a little bit less necessary, it's not shared and stuff like that, we use the component store. And because component store in the selectors or in the effects can reach out into the global store for extra data that it needs, there's no problem with that. You can even combine the data from local store, which is a component store, and the global one, no problem, and pass it to the component in the selector itself. So we'll see some of that as well. Awesome. Okay, let me then start with the demos, because we have like 8 of them, and I'd like to really show how it'll be a little bit of live coding. Let's see how that goes. Okay. So if you want to follow along, I shared the links should be in the description for both the Stack Blitz and the GitHub demo. All right. Let me get to my screen here. All right. So I'm using the demo branch here. It's basically stripped out of all the parts that need to be added. It has all the 8 demos that we'll go over. But we'll start with the first one. And the first one is, we'll have a component here. So I put the template here as well, so we can see how it goes. All right, here's our component. And right away you see it's missing some of the things. Actually, the first thing I need to do is to show the actual thing. Let me just, okay, before we get to this one, I'll switch to master, because master has everything completed. I just want to, and a live stream died, and we should be back, hopefully.
Yep.
And we should be back, right? Okay, good.
Yeah, we're good.
All right. So I switched to master for a second, where everything's completed. I just want to show what we're working with a little bit. So basically, this is like a book. We have a title for it. We have a number of pages for it. And basically this is the first thing we're trying to do. And we can, set the title. Title is updated right away. Author is pulled from somewhere else. We don't care about that at the moment. Basically, a few controls like title, number of pages, which we can either set ourselves here or just +1 it, and it all kind of works. And this is basically a preview how our book would look like. And it also has the local state description. So this one's pulling out what the local state is at the moment. So this is what we'll start with, demo one. I'll switch back to the demo branch. Okay. So because everything's complaining about all the data missing, I had to comment it out so it would work at least a little bit. Okay. So let me just uncomment some of the stuff first. All right. So it's just a template. We could go briefly over the template, but basically it has the input for title, right? And the way we do it, we use the NG model. We read from the title observable, right? So whenever that changes, it'll give us the values. So we async pipe it, so it's observable. It unwraps it. Whenever the new title is there, it will push it into this input. Whenever we change it, we have this update title callback. All right. Same for the page count. We also have a button for the page count where we just +1 it, and basically the rest is the book itself. We have a display title, which is a little bit different. We'll get to that in a second. It shows our page count and the local state as well, just like so we unwrap it. All right, so those are our callbacks. Let's just first try to implement it. So first of all, we need to extend our. This is the first example we'll do. Okay, yeah, it's really struggling. Okay, so we need to extend our component store. And this is the basic example. I don't recommend doing it later on, but sometimes if you just need a component store for this particular component here, it should be fine. And we'll use the book state for it. Let me see. Here's our book state. So our book state, something that we would keep in the store itself, is author, title, and page count, right? So we would pass that book state into our component store so it knows the shape of it. So once we do that, we need to initialize our component store. And the way we can do it here is we would call super, because we're extending that right now. And we would pass the initial state to this. And our initial state will just get the author from whatever fake data somewhere and title of a book and page count. So basically we will initialize our component that way. All right, so now we have some kind of data in there, which is author, title, and page count. Okay. All right, so then the next thing we do is we will provide this local state to this to the template, and we need basically to get the entire state. So how do we do this? Well, we'll declare this local state property, and we will get it. So we have something like this state, and this is what I did show in the APIs. But this is the entire observable of the entire state that we have. So this is basically, in a nutshell, this is an observable of the entire book state. All right, so this is this is the way we can read it from there.
Do you want us to ask questions now? You want to let you get through the demo first?
Let me just go through this demo first one, and then we'll get to the questions. All right.
Okay.
Awesome. Unless some of if the question is really in the context of it, we can probably address it right away.
Yeah, sure. So I'll just lob this one out here for you. Can you synchronously get a value from the state? I think that's going to be the question that's going to get asked.
Yes. Can we get it synchronously out of state? Right now, we don't. It's one of the open questions that I put. I don't recommend it. If we do give an option to synchronously get the value out of it, it would be abused a lot. Right now, this entire component store allows us to use something that's called change detection strategy on push, right? And it means that component itself notifies where things, it runs change detection when either of its inputs change or within the component something happens, and we call like detect changes or mark for check, whatever, or whatever the new IVA APIs are. Those are called basically in the async pipes. So whenever you work with async pipes, those are all handled for you. So getting it synchronously and start messing around with it that way will get you in trouble. So I don't recommend that. We don't have that API. We might open it up. There are good use cases. We'll get to them in a second. But I don't. But Brendan is hinting me that he will be opposing to that, which is fine. All right. So now we have the local state. Next thing we need to provide is the title. All right. So we need a title. Let's provide the title, and it'll be very easy. Well, we'll create the read-only title. Read-only title. All right, and that title we would select. So we get this the entire state, and out of the state we need the title itself. All right, very easy. So now this is an observable of title. Whenever title changes within this component store, this will notify us, and it's very reactive. So notice we don't care how it changes, we only care that it does change, right? So this is the beauty of NGRX general as a global store, or actually basically any of the push-based systems. We are not asking for the values, we are listening for them change. So we don't know what changes the title, but we know that whenever the title changes, we get the value. So we'll create the similar thing for the author. And this is the author first last name, the select, okay, and we'll get the state similar way, state author is there. Okay, so we have those two. That's awesome. Now some of our component is happy. We'll need the page count as well, but let's just add that right away. It's boring, but we have it. Okay, so we have the page count, right? We have author and we have a title. Now what we need to do is to create a display for the book, and the way we have it is the book display title. It combines the title and the author itself. It says the book title is by this author. So this is basically what we're trying to do. We want to say whenever the title changes or whenever the author changes, we'll adjust this to be titled by this author. Okay? Are we still live stream? Good. All right. So let's create that. We'll create a display title. Oops. And this will be this select. And we need to select it from two things. We need to, first of all, we need a title. So we'll just do this title. Okay. And then we need to select from, we need to get the author as well. So we'll do this author. It's not really helping me right now because it's so busy. All right. And then when we get both of them, we now need to combine them together, and we have this sort of like a projector function. All right, so it selects the title and selects the author. Oops. And then boom, we have it. Okay. So we now have two data sources, right? The title itself and the author that we get somehow. Well, right now it's a static author. Author doesn't change much right now at this example. But whenever the title changes, our book cover would get the new things. For example, here, Okay, yeah, I need to restart this. All right, let's see. We have any other complaints? No, we don't have any other complaints. All right, let's see, and I'll serve it. What's the motivation for using this versus managing your own subject? Multiple things. First of all, this one already provides all the unsubscribe subscribes for you. This one allows you to strip away the subject. We have the subject within this component store, so you don't have to. So it's all there already. And the third one is the effect itself. It's such a powerful thing, and having to recreate effect every time, or something like effect, where you can update the values, and the values would be pushed into some kind of pipe where you can handle things, is a big change. It's a big advantage for me. All right. Any other questions while it's...
There was a question earlier about when you use an updater, does it rely on actions as far as like reducing the state? Are actions anywhere present in the component store?
So actions are signals, right? So we, even from the indirect store, right, the global one, we still read the data with a select, right? So we select, we sort of read it that way, but we notify of changes for their actions. Here, actions are removed, and basically, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but basically things like setting state.
No teasers. Go,
yes,
keep going.
Yes. So we handle it differently. Basically, most of the times method calls would be all right. So it doesn't like the display title. Wait, will it have it? Did I mistype it? Display title. That should be good, right? Wow, it's really strong. It's usually so fast, my laptop. Right now, it's trying to do so many things at once.
The laptop was like, "Oh, you trying to do a demo?" Yeah, I got something to say about that. A live demo.
So the question, I see a question from while it's building again. While it's building, it's a good time to actually answer some of the questions. So when does it become hot? Does ComponentStore handle that? So it becomes hot right away, right? Because we provide the initial value right away, so it becomes hot right away. All right. Okay. So basically, we're not updating the values yet. That's why it doesn't work, obviously. Okay. Let's actually do that then. So we need to do the title. So now, here our input for the title. Here it is. This is our title input. It says whenever my model changes, I want to update the title, and it passes the new value. So let's implement that. We have the title that's being passed. So what we'll do is we'll do the set state, and what we'll do is we say, okay, this is the current state that we have, but we are updating. So we'll need to spread it first because we don't want to touch any other values other than the title itself. So page count and everything else stays the same, and then the title itself is being updated. Basically, it's the same as this shorthand. If you doesn't know, it's basically the same way. I'm just setting the new title here. Okay, so let's see if things change. I hope it doesn't compile that long. Okay, good, better now. All right. All right, so now it works, right? So when we change the title, things work as well. So we change the local state, it's being pushed into the state. And again, this serves as a signals, right? We send signals to update the state. State is changed, we'll listen for that, combine in a way, and basically this gets updated as well. Okay. So the next thing we would quickly set same for the page count, right? So right now page count is here. It's a very similar idea, except for we just convert it to number as well at the same time. Okay, and now when we update the page count in this input, here it is. It's a very similar format. It will get updated there. Okay, so we see how many pages of awesomeness we get. All right, awesome. But now we have another +1 which doesn't work at the moment. Basically, we have two things that affect the same property, the same page count. Two things independently, and we want to add that as well. So here we have the increase page count. So whenever that button is clicked, we wanted to increase that as well. So we'll do the similar way, set state, page count, but now instead of just setting to the entire new value here, we will do it a bit differently. We will just +1 it. And if it's not set, it will just fall back to 0. Okay. Alright, so this is what I'm going to do. So now page count is +1, should also work. Alright, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9. That's the 9 should be good. Alright, so let's see. Alright, there you go, and then +1 increases that by 1. So both affect the same property in our local state. Okay, so we have that going, and this is example number 1. So we have, recapping, we have a title and another property that are combining together into some other value here. All right, and we also have this value, the page count, that is affected by multiple things, right? Either clicking the button or entering it manually. So each of them affect that, and it works fine. So they set it immediately. Okay, so that was the first one, and this is where you extend the component store itself. For me, I don't quite envision the component store being used this way. This is nice and cool for a smaller example. It introduce quite a lot of like moving pieces, which maybe it's fine. It's fully reactive. Titles change, things change. It's all has the same things, but testing such a component would be a little bit harder. And I think it has too much in here. Right now we're just combining some of the strings or adding numbers together, but if the logic becomes more than that, it would be a little bit harder. So what we can do instead is we can go into the demo 2, and let me undo this template as well. All right. And what we can do instead is push some of it into the middle layer. That middle layer would be responsible for all the business logic itself. So here I would call it, I would typically call it like a bookstore, right? For example, here it would be book 2 store because we'll have multiple, and this is component 2. So let me extend this real quick, and we'll take a look what it does. So we'll extend this. Okay. extend doesn't make sense. What it does right now, our bookstore, it itself extends the component store. So we don't have any anything much here yet, but I just wanted to show that we can instead extend that bookstore ourselves. Okay, let's see. Extend the book to store. Yeah, that should be fine. It doesn't like a lot of things right now. Why doesn't like a lot of things right now? We didn't change much here. Let me see what exactly it doesn't like. Okay, I need to save it.
Line says you're missing an S on extends.
Exactly, yeah. That would be it, yeah. Thank you. Oh, thanks, Kate. Oh, Lens too. Okay, awesome. Everybody picked up. Nice. Okay. By the way, this would be also a good time to show that, for example, in the demo 1, right? We change the state, right? We go home, we get back, the state was completely erased, right? So it's completely refreshes everything. It completely destroys once that component is destroyed. Okay, so now we're basically on the demo 2. On the demo 2. All right, and now the way we would do it, page count, okay, and we would get the values that we need from the parent component. So we have our book 2, and it would pass us the initial book data. So I'll use it as an input, and I'll pass that to my local store, to my component store. Okay, so I would have input, and this will be interesting one. So it will be set book. I think it's called the book. Let me just double check. Yes, it does take the book itself, and then we will do the state, which will be a book state. Needs to have that as well. So very similar as we did before. Because it's extending it, we can do the set state. And we don't care what the current state is because we are providing the entire initial state. All right. That looks compiled successfully. All right. Let me just recompile it quickly. Quickly is a is a wrong wrote here. Okay. Let's see. So this one is a setter for input for whenever we get the value from the parent component, which is our container for this demo, for example. It sends us a book initial one. We would send it straight to the bookstore as well, which we extend.
Cool. I think another question I would think people would ask is, does this mean we're going to start spreading our state across our presentation components? Or should you still follow the kind of the top-down approach where your smart components still do all the heavy lifting?
Yeah, so smart component, we can do this presentation itself, presentational as well. It's just the store itself or the component store that accompanies it could handle some of the things. There's still value in the pure presentational components. This obviously book itself is fine to take all the inputs that it needs to show and just be done with this. So it won't be trying to replace it. However, it will try to unload the non-presentational components that are trying to do too much stuff within, and we'll try to split it up and push it into the service to handle all the business logic there, and they'll be even clearer in the third example that we'll have. Okay, so it's really building slow. It feels like I'm rebuilding the entire universe right now, and it's like such a small application. Here's the importance of I'm not used to this speed.
You are building the entire universe. You're building 8 demos and live streaming.
Yeah, each one is a small one. So it is rebuilding. Give it a second. Let me see if there's another questions that we can answer at the same time.
Yeah, Lars asked, is the store hot? He said behavior subject is not hot or does a component store automatically subscribe to the state underneath to make it hot?
Does the component store subscribe to make it hot?
But any subscribers are going to immediately get the latest value, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a behavior subject.
Exactly.
I guess that's different from it being quote unquote hot per se, as it's already producing.
Does it does something without anybody listening?
Yeah, I guess that's the question.
I mean, it does whenever you push values. If there's no values, there's no point of anything right there, right? Okay, let me see why it looks like it's rebuilt already. Let me see if there are any console errors. Oh, that'll be the DevTools right now will push it a little bit to the bottom so I can see.
Yeah, what like I said, what I could see people using this for is, and maybe you have a demo of this already, so you can cut me off if I'm wrong, but components that are, like you said, more dynamic. Like you have a set of components that like have the same. You're basically creating a lot of dynamic components that need to manage some kind of state, and you want them to be like brought up and torn down, independently of each other. And if you were doing this with like NGRX store, then you'd have to like create a dictionary of components with IDs and kind of track each one of those things independently with selectors and try to like correlate the IDs to when data comes back from each one of those things. And I think this would allow you to have more dynamic components in that way without trying to have the extra mechanics of trying to hook it into a global store.
Exactly. Yes, especially by IDs, and this is where it becomes complicated. At multiple times, people ask me, like, how would you have a complex components that I need multiple instances at the same time? And this one I'll show you here. By the way, I was having issue because my template was empty. Now it's good because I didn't have the input. Okay, so all right now. So what happened here? Not that much. We just created a service that itself handles the store itself, the component store, and it has like the book state that it handles. And the only thing it does right now, it initializes. So we still have everything.
We're buffering again.
There you go, and we should be good now. Are we back?
It's back for me right now.
Let's see if we're back. All right, it's back. Awesome. Okay, so now we have a third iteration here. So the service that we will call the book3 store or bookstore, it extends the component, but now we moved a lot of the stuff that we were doing in the component, like title, author, and other stuff, into this service itself. And instead, it starts providing some of the methods or callbacks, right? To set the book, update the book, and it would know internally how to set state and stuff like that, or increase the page count. So what we end up doing, and then in the component itself, we no longer want to extend the service. We don't want to extend the service. We don't want to call super and stuff like that. We want to inject it. And because we also provide the store in the providers here, this is very important part. Because we also provide this service, this bookstore, in the providers itself, it becomes a component scope provider. What it means is that when the component will be destroyed, it will call the ung on destroy on this service as well, and it will clean up all the local state by itself. Okay, we're having the same way we push the values into it. What we're going to do right now is a little bit different. So we now all of our callbacks from the template, for example, when I update the title or update the page count or increase, we delegate that to the bookstore itself. Okay, and the way we get the value back, we get into something we call view model. Read only. Okay, so then that's actually step number 3. Let's create it first. So we'll create this view model, and the way it would work is we would do similar to we select everything we need for that component. Read only. We would do could do get book view model, for example. And that would, oops, that doesn't need to be read only, it's a function, it's a method. Alright, and here we would return and we would select. So what do we need for our view model? We need this title, we need this display name. So we are actually creating the view model for the component itself. So we are not pushing the author in there because component itself doesn't care about the author. It cares about the display title already, which was aggregated from the data such as author and the title. It needs the title itself because we can change it. That's why it's there. So it needs also the page count. Page count. So we're passing other observable, and because we're also passing this local state to render, we'll just pass that as well. So we'll pass this state, the entire state itself, and now we would show how we aggregate that, and we would have title, display title. Page count and local state. All right, so we now have that, and we would use all of them and would return them here. Except for we don't need to rep. Okay. So let's see local states. Right.
Yeah, while you're doing that, I'll just add in, I think another good part of this is that like with the other NGERX libraries, you're still building on top of RxJS. So if you wanted to chain more things on top of this select, just because you're getting an observable there, you still get to be able to do more things, like I said, off of that.
Yeah,
observable
exactly.
after you've built up this like view model that you have there.
Yeah, exactly. So and now we can have this view model from this bookstore that we have injected. Okay, store, and we would call this one. All right. So now we have this view model that's generated. This is all we need for our component to render and work correctly. And instead of async piping every single thing within our template, we would unwrap it here. So we have a ng container on top, for example, and unwrap it here as the VM. And everywhere where we were async subscribing to those observables, now we can just take it as regular values. And we have our entire model set for this. Oh, it's dropping the stream so easily. It's kind of interesting. We had a few bufferings during the Angular Toronto. Oh, a few dropped times during Angular Toronto meetup, but it wasn't that bad. All right, so just again, we're comparing the two side by side. Now our components become really simple. When things change, it notifies the component store about this. So these are, if you look at it on like a little bit, these are almost like actions, right? But instead of dispatching that particular action, we're calling a particular method on this store. So we removed the action indirection. Action indirection is fantastic on the global scale because you need to notify other parts of completely different things, right? And you don't want to tie the entire application together. You want to be lazy load things together and all of that stuff. However, in a smaller scale, that indirection might not be needed. So having this are almost like actions, basically. Okay, so calling the reducers and calling the effects is almost like actions. We'll get to effects in 1 second. Okay, so here we go. Those are the 3, and let's make sure our demo 3 still works. And it probably doesn't because for the same reason. Okay, we have the book 3 here. Component. We'll get the view model. This is fine. Let me just refresh the page. See if that's fine. Alright, and again, why doesn't it work? Let's see. Because I didn't save it. Saving it would be nice. Alright, let's see if there are any other questions in the meantime. One other good question was here, can we do, and this is something I should have said, this set state takes a function that provides the state and you need to give it back the exact same type, so book state. And we cannot do things mutably here as well. It has to stay immutable here. So this is kind of the important part. That's why we do it this way. We don't just do state dot title equals new title. We don't do that. We need to immutably update the state. And the reason why we do it, for multiple reasons actually, but one of them is we don't want to emit a new observable for something that didn't change. And the way we check it is with the distinct until changed, and that checks by reference.
I'm going to put on my Tim hat here and say, well, can we use Emmer to can I extend Emmer on top of this and update things mutably that way and still maintain some safety?
I think it would be a good idea. If you want to have a separate thing, sure. The problem is that sometimes somebody doesn't want to bring an extra library and stuff like that.
Yep.
So you don't want to tie it to a particular library. You want to be self-contained.
Yep, I'm just asking the question because I know Tim's going to do it. I know you're there, Tim. I see you. He's going to throw Emmer on top of this instantly.
And I like it. He added a bunch of things already to the Nginx extension, right? His library there that works with Emmer. I like it. It could be nice. Okay, we are it's still compiling. Wow. So set state is basically in reducer. Yes, almost. We'll actually get to the next example, and I'll show you how we can further improve that. Set state is mostly convenient to use within the component itself. When you have it here, yes, you can kind of do it this way. You'll lose some of the benefits that we'll see in a second. By the way, one thing
Yeah,
that
like
yeah.
I said, I have real quick about the set state. Set state is more for convenience. Like if you wanted to, like you said, you wanted to extend a component, extend your component off of the component store. That way you still have an API to actually get the state or you have an API to read from the state and to be able to set the state easily
Yeah.
and still get torn down with the components torn down. So that was the motivation behind doing that, because we had a way to like build up updaters and effects, but we didn't have like a easy way to just say, I want to push a new state into the current. Needed a new way to push that state in there. So
And
just some background on that.
yeah, and the set state, if you see the API, it literally calls the reducer or updater with nothing in, just
Yep.
very, very, very thin helper to handle some of the more particular use cases. Because we don't want to force you into something, and especially if it doesn't overcomplicate the library. It's simple. I really want to show you. Here's the component store is in this one index file, and it's literally including its observable 162 lines of code at the moment. That's basically it. But okay, so I wanted to touch on testing this, and I don't know if I did. Testing such component will be very, very simple. You don't need to try to adjust things like author or title or whatever you want. You literally just provide it. You mock the bookstore just like your regular you mock services, because it's a service. You just provide a mock for it, and you say when you go get the book view model, provide this view model. Like it has some kind of display title and display name and like count and things like that. And you go and you check in your DOM that those are something that you just provided. And when you click on things like add +1, or if you enter something into the title or number of pages, you just have to mock on this one, and you call the spy and verify that update title was invoked. That's it. It becomes super simple to test. And the bookstore itself, you can really test in isolation. You don't need the entire test bed for it. You can just instantiate it, set the count, and make sure that these observables are emitting when you're doing something like set book or update title, whatever. So you don't need the entire test bed for it. Super simple. Again, you separate two things and test them independently. You test component, and this is what I was trying to promote for a while now. It can be basically almost like as a function on the data that you pass into it. It just produces that, gets the data, and like, here's my data, and I put it in the template. That's it. Okay, so it's running, it's still working, it's all great, number of pages increase and all that stuff, all the things. But now super simple. All right, so any questions about that?
I got a question. Do you recommend, I know what you're going to say, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. Do you recommend, I see you are, even the view model that you have built with your selector there, you wrapped it in a function. Why would you do that versus just returning the observable itself?
Yeah, that's a good question. So basically, you could just do this one as read-only VM. Thank you for asking this question. And you can save that, and you can go into your component and just do this. It would be exactly the same thing. It's up to you how you want to do it. I typically try to wrap it in the function because it's a lot easier to mock the functions. Although mocking properties or spying on properties is almost as easy now, but I prefer it that way. The only thing I don't need this one as well. Okay. Basically, very similar things. It's just a matter of preference, and really doesn't matter. It both ways work. Okay, and you see our demo works there as well. All right, so the next one. We're getting into more and more exciting territory right now. Let's see. All right, so here I was passing the initial state for the whole book state, right? Which again we can take a look for a second. It gives us the author, title, and page count. But what if we have a service? Hold on, let me just check this. That's the one. Yes, store. Okay. Yes. Okay. That's correct. All right, so now what we're going to do here is, what if our component instead just gets that ID, right? And that's it. That's all it gets. And it has to, figure out what the data it needs by itself. Well, in our bookstore, we can inject other services too, right? For example, like the book service. This is a stateless service. If we can look at it for a second, it's a stateless service that we call to get the book. It goes somewhere. Well, technically, usually it would be HTTP somewhere. Here is just a timer of randomness. It'll be somewhere from 1 to 2 second delay, and it would return us the book itself. So we're not basically getting this. So in this case, we're not getting the data from the parent component, but we are asking for this data directly into other services. This is just one of the examples that you might run into. All right, so how would we handle that? And now, because it's HTTP, of course, it won't be instant, so we need to introduce some kind of concept of loading as well. All right, so this is 3. We need to go to the 4, into the bookstore 4. So we'll have a status. Right now we have like 3 states: unsaved, loaded, loaded. Again, you can do whatever you want. So we'll just say that status. We need some kind of status on it. And the rest we are just picking up from the book itself. So we have a book model now. And that book model has the ID, author, and again, by the way, you might not have an ID. The new book, the new book that we just created might not have an ID. Author, title, and page count. All right, on top of it, for the book state itself, we're adding the status itself. And here, we need to initialize because we're requiring the status. So we can initialize it as unsaved. All right. So we have that. That in the comma. Good. All right, we have that. Now, because we want to display that to the component as well, we'll add it to our view model things. So we'll also add the status that we need to show. All right. And this is, so I have here to explain this updaters. the updater is we've been using functions here to set the state, and what I showed is basically we can create the updater instead and pass this value to it. So this set book is the same way to do it as set book, this updater or reducer. Again, we're still discussing how to name it best. And then we say that it needs a state of the type. What is this type? This is the type book state. And it takes the book of the type book state too, in this case. And basically this one just set the book is not the best example because you can just do this here because it's the same thing. But basically this is what updater is. So now this is what it would do, right? And when we call the set ID from the component, and the input we didn't yet, or actually anywhere, or set book or update title, the ones that you've seen already, it will just call this updater and update the values. Unlike the functions that we had here before, where we can only take a single value, right? For example, title string. Updaters can take the value, for example, a string, or they can take the observable as well. And we'll see some examples of those as well. Okay. So we have those updaters. So set ID, they basically reduce the state, they configure the state, they adjust the state. So set book, update title, update page count. Okay, and then we would write one for update status, because we just introduced status. Update status, and this will be this updater. And it would be state. So we'll take the state of. So state of book state, and then status. And I'm returning the new object where I'm spreading the previous state, so I'm not touching anything else, and I'm adding the status that's updated the status. So okay, so now this is an updater that updates status. So whenever I call this one with the new status, it will push this value into here, and it will update the status. Okay, so we have this updater. And now we're getting into the fun part. So what we're trying to do now is here. When somebody opens, when this component gets initialized and we get the ID set, which right now our parent component of book provides the book ID, for example, 4. What we want to do is we want to send a signal to retrieve this book from our backend or from the book service, and basically orchestrate everything we need to set the state to loading while we're doing this. Once we're done, set it to loaded. Or if there is no ID at all, we don't want to show anything, which will be just unsaved or the initial state as we have it. So this is what the effects are for. They would be orchestrating all of that. And because it's a lot of typing, I didn't want to type it all to save the time. I'll just go carefully over this. So we're writing our first effect, which is a getBook effect. Here I provide the type. So this is the effect. I provide the type for these IDs, so will become observable of these. I can do it this way, or I can do it this way. It's fine either way. This way is probably preferable, but it doesn't matter too much either way. Both those way work. So what I'm saying is that when somebody passes an ID to this book, I would push that ID into the observable stream. And here I see, okay, what if I had other IDs already, right? So for example, first I would do is I'll filter if there is if ID is like undefined, we'll just skip it. Second, what we do is we just wrote this updater, and we will use the tap operator to set the status for loading. Okay. Then we would do the switch map. Why the switch map here? So if there are multiple IDs coming in to load this one for this component, because it's responsible for one particular data, we would drop the other ones, all right? If we're requesting any other IDs previously or any data for the previous IDs, so we would use the switch map here. And this is something that you cannot just do with your service with the subject things, because this is the beauty of it. This allows you to control that flattening strategy: switch map, concat map, merge map, or exhaust map. Basically, how we handle the new values coming in. Do we drop them? Do we drop the new values? Do we drop the results? Do we parallelize? Do we queue them? All of those things. So in this way, we would, if we were requesting any other book here, we would just drop that. And again, this works very similar like in Nginx effects. You're familiar with those. Okay, so it would switch map. We'll go to the book service and we'll ask for the book. Remember, there's a timer there, right, from 1 to 2 seconds. And we would get the result out of it. And we have a book now, and we would call the setBook. SetBook is another updater that we have here. It's this one. And this would set the book. Here you would also handle your error. So you would catch error here as well. That's why I have this pipe here. You would catch error here as well. I don't want to miss that one because it's very important. Especially if you're dealing with network requests. And
I don't catch error. So what are you talking about? I don't catch any error.
If you don't catch error, it's the same thing. Your effect would die. And again, there are some proposal if we want to restart this effect or not. For now, we're not. I'll leave it out for now. Okay, but it will die. So basically, catch errors in this pipe, please. And then the last one is, okay, once we're all done, we would set the status to loaded. So get book. This is our effect that we wrote. So how do we trigger this effect? How do we trigger this effect? Well, we go to our component, Bookstore component, and here we have this input of IDs, which is the book ID. And here, what we would use this effect. We would say this book store. I'll probably type it sooner. It would be get book, right? This is the effect that we had, and we would pass our book ID to it. Cool, huh? So this triggers our effect now. So we say, okay, bookstore, give me the book. So we're sending the signal, similar to other ones, like updated title. And we don't know if, by the way, you might have noticed here, our component doesn't care which one of those is effect, which one of those is a straight up updater, reducer that actually changes the state. Our component doesn't care here. It just calls those things like typical service, right? Give me the book. this book will get in here and will push the new ID in. It will go through here and it would retrieve the new book values and, you know, give it back. And then that would because we're setting it into the state, into our local component state, this set book will update our local state, and because it gets updated, our view model would react. It will select all of these new things and push it to the component, and the component's view model will get the new observable, and the entire component would be happy with the new value and will show this value. Awesome. So this is touching a little bit on the effects. For people who are familiar with indirects effects, this is kind of similar, except for you're yourself telling it when to trigger, and you don't have an action that triggers it. All right, let's see now our demo 4. All right, demo 3, demo 4. Okay, so we. One more thing we need to do. I'm like, where's my spinner? I need to add the spinner too. All right, so this is if our status is loading. By the way, we're not looking at the data here. We're just saying, okay, whatever the status is. Status is loading, I show the spinner. Status is not loading or anything else, I don't show the spinner. Here's the spinner, boom. And again, let's see it again. So if we go somewhere else, demo 4, it passes the ID, it goes, pretends to do a request and get updated. This is our local state as well. I don't know if you need to zoom it in a little bit. Here we go. So it's basically page count, status loaded, and this is changed automatically always. So this is an effect. Do we have any questions about effect? Because this is a super important topic. I'll make sure that I didn't. All right. Shows loading.
Questions: Are effects any more or less complicated with ComponentStore than they are with Nginx effects?
Yeah, they should be simpler for the reason because component itself doesn't care what's underneath it. All it cares is that they can call it, provide the value, and it triggers something, either updates it. So it should be very straightforward because you're calling them yourself. You don't have action indirection here. And again, I don't want to say the actions are bad. Actions are fantastic for the purpose of global state, where you want to communicate from one part to the app to another about something something they share in common. This is within this book or its children, or we'll see a little bit further some other components. But basically, this is a component. Yeah, so I think it's fine to have them here like this, and they should be a bit easier. But the concepts are the same. So if you had any experience with Indirect Store or Redux at all, these should be very, very familiar with you. All right. So next one. Next one is author. All right, so we're moving up a little bit. So far we had been dealing with a single book. How about if we have an author now? An author can have multiple books. All right, so we'll create an author component. Author component has its own author store that sort of is responsible for its own. It's basically exactly a similar thing. It gets its own view model out of the author store. When the new book is created, it will call to create the new book. When it wants to update its name, it will let the store know as well, hey, my name's changed. And the store here, let's see what the author is all about. Author Excel also can be loading. So it's very similar concept here. Author itself has an ID, a name, and which book IDs this author kind of owns. Okay, so you probably see where this is going. we can do the similar thing. We have an updater for getting the, creating the new book, updating the status, setting the name, setting the author, and the effect of getting the author, which does a very similar thing that book was doing right now, where it would set the loading, but now it talks to the author service to get the author by ID. So very similar things. Oh, one thing I kind of missed is that not all updaters are supposed to be consumed by the component itself. For example, set update status, right? It's a private one, right? So this is an updater, but it's only meant to be used within the component store itself. Okay. For example, effects use it, right? Effects update the statuses. But they are not, the update status cannot be done from the component itself. The component only consumes the status if it's loaded or loading. All right, let's look at the author itself. So author template, fairly straightforward. It also has an input, right? So when the name is updated, when it's loading, it has its own progress bar. We also show the author state local. And then what we have is it goes to the books that author owns, or written, whatever, or wants to write, whatever, and basically creates those child components of books, okay, and passes those IDs to it. And then each book independently will go and ask the data it needs. All right, let me show you that. It should be running right away. So here it is. So we're getting the author right now, and then we get the author and we get each book. So for example, this is the author here, and this is the books that they have. And again, we can see that. Okay, good. Book. Let me see what I have to do here. I'm missing the make sure.
While you're looking for that, I'll just ask a random question. Why are you using ng model and ng model change as opposed to reactive forms? Or is it just for the demo?
Yeah, just for the demo.
Okay.
Yeah, because form by itself is a good container of state, and you can push that further into the store itself as well, or within the component itself. So I just wanted to show that's the way it could be done. All right. So one thing that you notice here is right now we are not getting the author names, right? Because we're just getting the ID. Okay, we should be back live. Let's see. Are we back live? Good. Okay, so what we did is within the author, we created a selector for its name. This is the author store, author component store. So we created a name. But because book is a child of the author, it also has access to the store. And within the bookstore, we can inject this author store. And now we can read those names ourselves. So we have a way to update. So what I'll do here is I'll write the updater, this updater, or reducer, I don't know what the name is, still better. I'll write the updater that takes state, right, which is the book state, and takes the author, which is a string, and express the state first of all, and then author. It's good. Author should be. Okay, so this is an updater. Doesn't do much by itself. Now, what we need to pass new values into it. And the way we've been doing things with updater before, we were passing it through the component, right, imperatively or something like that. But what I was saying before, it can take a value or it can take the observable itself as well. So what we can do is instead pass this author store. Here you go. Name. All right. So basically now we attach to this observable that is produced by the author store, which is name. And whenever the name changes in the parent component, right, it will let all the children know that, hey, my name's changed now. I'm a new person now. And that would update the local store, local states of each of the components itself. Okay, let's see. So right now, I was changing things. Nothing was happening. Only local state here was changing of the author itself. And now we'll reload. All right, and now we'll reload. So you can see it's already picked up, but now let's try change the name. So you can see the name changes and both the components are changing their name. Cool, huh? So that means that child components have access to their parents' component store. And they can get whatever the data they need as well. Okay. So this was example 5. Let's see. Okay, so yes, updaters listen to the observable from the parents. By the way, we can add another one, and it's empty, but it already knows what author is there, right? Because we already know it starts as unsaved. And I can type things, and it basically works as expected. I can do multiple as well, and when we change something here, they all react. Pretty cool. Any questions here? Because this is an important part as well, that component store, component state can be shared with children, not only by inputs, but also they can access it directly. Observable hotness, yes, exactly.
Lars has been waiting all this time for you to make it hot, and he found it. So there you go.
All right, yay, awesome.
Action's begun. The mic's not listening.
Wait, but with actions is again. So actions is another interaction that's useful for its own purposes. Here, an extra interaction like actions, I think might not be necessary because everything is kind of cuddled together, and we know how to work with this, and we just read values from our local state by calling methods. It's kind of neat. By the way, I didn't change anything in the component book, right? So it was still just reading its view model and minding its own business. It didn't change. Nothing changed here. It's still the same thing, right? And notifies the store that ID changed. It reads its view model and notifies about the other stuff. So nothing changed here. Pretty cool. Okay.
Somebody's gonna listen to this and say actions are trash and you shouldn't use them.
No, they're a very good mechanism of notifications through the entire application. Exactly. All right. So let's go to the next demo. So now we have an author that each has its own components. Okay. Now you probably see where I'm coming with that. So author with its books, as a primitive example as it is, could be already considered a complex component, right? The author with books, right? It's the complex component that has its state. what if my page needs multiple of those components at the same time, and each needs to track its own state? Well, that's what exactly we see right now in the demo 5. We are just having one author, single author, right? We just had that 5. But in the demo 6, we would have authors, multiple. So we'll start with 2 authors, and we'll just create multiple. And by the way, from the this demo 6 authors component, it doesn't care much about how authors are managing its own stuff. It just creates multiple of them, right? It just does the ng4 over them and say, here's the ID, figure out the rest yourself. So that means that author components can be plugged really anywhere in the application, just given the ID, and it would figure out everything it needs by itself. So that's why such large components become easily shareable, and moreover, we can have them at the same time, multiples, and we don't even know how many because you can push as many authors as you want. Let's see how that works. Let me see if I do. I don't think I do any changes here. I don't think I did. Actually, there's no changes whatsoever in the code between those two. Let me just double check. So I'll select for compare author store 6 and author store 5. Yeah, well, comment. Identical. So nothing changes. We just go and add a bunch of authors and see the result. We can see that each author is independently working. So I update something here, and all of it shall component pick up the new name. Can erase whatever, author 1. So they all react. And all change for this. This one independently does things. I can create the new one with new names and add some books to it. So it all just works whatever we want, how many authors and books we want. Each author independently tracks things, and we can have as many as we want. So author is a complex component, and each book has access to its state via that component author component state. So this is demo 6, which is this is a problem that a lot of people run into, and especially trying to solve it. Like, hey, I want to put all of this data in the NGRX. That was sometimes creating a little bit of a problem, especially putting by IDs and stuff like that. Mind you, again, if we go to home, for example, and we get back to 6, it's all destroyed, right? And we're loading again, and they are loading all the stuff again by themselves. So it's all cleaned up. Awesome. So this was the component, large component with the child components. Each can have their own local store, independent, and children can access parents' component store. Next example is an interesting one, 7. Oops. So we already saw how updater takes an observable where he was taking author's name in each book and react to that. So here's a little bit differently. So this is our navigation. So you see, if you see, so right now it's 0. When we click of any of these buttons, we will navigate to 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, stuff like that. Right. So we navigate. Right now we don't load anything for a reason. So those are basically different IDs of a book. And right now we see this basically uninitialized empty state. Okay, 7. Let's look at it. So first I want to point out that this component no longer takes that input, right? So it doesn't take an input at all from parent. this component is like, okay, I can be plugged anywhere. I'm just getting the values from the store itself. I'm getting whatever my view model is. So no input here, no IDs, nothing. But where will we be getting IDs? Well, in our store, I inject the activated route. Okay, so now I need to listen for route changes, and I can do that. Okay, and I can do that. So what I would do is see, get book is already there, so this is in effect. Okay, so first I'll create the observable. For example, const my book ID observable, which I get from, actually this is activator route param map. Okay, and this is my params, and I'll be listening for params get book ID, and I'll show you where the only thing I need to pipe it as well, of course, and I need to map it, of course. Okay, so this now is an observable of book IDs. Let me show you where this param coming from. You probably figured it out already in our routing module. For the demo 7, I have a book ID as well, right? So it's picking up it from the routing, whatever our current route is. So it's clear here. Now it's 3, so it knows my book ID is 3. All right, so book ID. So now I need to, you remember we were calling the get book from the input, but now we can just wire it up here directly. So it says let's do get book. But instead of passing just a single ID, we now say, okay, here's your observable. Listen to that. And whenever book ID changes, we need to do this or 0, for example, because it produces null, and we're not handling null. We're handling undefined. I don't like nulls. And this is all strict, of course. String. Oh yeah, of course, because it's 0, so it's not string. Here you go. So now our component still doesn't care how it gets this data. It's just like, give me my view model, I'll display whatever you want. It's a responsibility to show the data. That's it. It doesn't do anything else. Everything we care about and how we wire it up and whatever is now in this component store. And here we would be listening for the params changes, for book ID changes, and whenever that changes, we'll get the new book and see if it works. Okay, so now we're at demo 3, 0, 1. See, it pretends that it's loading, and it all works.
One question, and I just thought about this kind of while you were walking through this. Do you think that this would, some people might get tripped up by this because they think that all the observables are automatically subscribed to?
All the observables are automatically subscribed to. They are subscribed to when you pass them to either an effect or the updater / reducer, whatever the name we decide on. So yeah. They are subscribed that way, and it's kind of nice to basically just give it an observable, and I'll actually point. The next example would be a better answer to your question even more.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so now we are wired up. It all works. By the way, because the get book is using the switch map, we can click many times different places, and every time we click, it drops the previous one and starts listening for the new one, right? So when we're done clicking, we'll only have 1 second, and boom, 1 to 2 seconds delay. So this is another showcase of how effect is really powerful to control that flattening strategy. All right, this was the nav example. Are there any questions? Yeah, so the question, let's see, there's some discussion if this one's Angular specific. Yeah, kind of. Right now it's quite Angular specific. It's just using a lot of Angular things, injections, and relying on the injection tree and stuff like that. In theory, ComponentStore itself, you could exclude it and just call, onDestroy yourself with whatever framework you decide to choose. If we, remove the onDestroy interface and some other things, but mostly, yeah, it's mostly meant to be used with Angular. But that's what we're here for.
Yeah, I'm going to say that NGRX is reactive libraries for Angular. So
yeah.
If this was, if we were trying to make it for, framework agnostic, then yeah, we would probably make some of those decisions, but primarily use is Angular here.
Yeah, and the ComponentStore itself, if you really want to make it framework agnostic, the only really, it uses a few things, but from Angular itself, it uses only onDestroy. So you remove the onDestroy here, and by the way, you can do it even not change. Okay, here I made it. Here I made it framework agnostic. You say, well, I don't have the onDestroy interface. Well, yes, but Angular doesn't really need the onDestroy interface. Interface is compile time thing. So it still looks for the method with the name ng onDestroy, and it'll destroy itself. Here I made it framework agnostic. Fairly straightforward, but it's not the point of it. We can do it. All right, so last demo, final one, also exciting one. So right now we have a component that cannot decide on its title. It's changing its mind rapidly. So let's try to implement that. Okay, so first of all, we want to change titles frequently, and just to show that we have some kind of observable within a component. For example, read only Apple title, and what we would do is we would have a timer. Just think about it. Yes, timer. That will fire 1 second after 2 to 3 seconds, and then we'll pipe this timer to map 2. Since we already have a way to set the title here, we'll reuse this one. I can just even call this would be something that just does the Apple. So this one will emit apples. Let's do apples. Every 3 seconds. It will emit every 3 seconds with a 1 second delay. Okay, so we have apples, and we'll have oranges, and we'll have bananas as well. So this will be oranges, because we want to compare apples and oranges. and bananas. Oranges, and with this one, bananas. This would be bananas. All right.
I think
So,
a good question after you work through this is kind of when would you use components, or would you use it to, even if your state only has a couple of properties, like what's the threshold of when you would start to use this as opposed to just putting the stuff in your component?
whenever you try to have a local state, whenever you have a lot of business logic within your or even whenever you start getting some kind of business logic within your component that's becomes less than a plus b, I would probably push it outside, because this is what I was promoting for a while now. I tried to have my component clean. I want to look at it. It should do few things only. It should take the values, put them in the template. If something happens in the template, it should let somebody know about this. This way, I really want to abstract and have my components, to be very easily testable and abstracted from any of the business logic. And actually, somebody recently asked the question on Twitter: where would you put that, right? In NGRX global store world, right? You'd put it in selectors. Some of it may be in effects. You would put it in the services if you can do that too, or even just pushing it outside of the component into the function, the pure function. Even if it lives within the same file as a component, I would try to do that. Okay, so we now have. Oops. All right, so we just wired up update title to the apples, right? For example, let me just save this, and if we open demo 8, we'll see this should update to apples within a second. Boom, so it's apples now. Okay, and it continues to emit apples, right? And the change state doesn't change because it's just apples, right? What about if we want to do another one, and we now want to also add oranges? But oranges will do with a 2-second delay, so they're not. So we have at least a second for apples. Okay. So this demonstrates that you can push multiple observables into the, for example, update title updater here. And you can see here is apples and oranges, each of them emitting and overriding the value. So you can listen to multiple observables that affect the same state. So update title, and update title you can use yourself as well, right? Type set. It also works. Okay.
Yep. Question came up: am I able to merge some global slice of state into local state? And is it good practice?
You can merge global state into local state. And again, if you are selecting, that would be a selector from store. You do ngrx store.select gives you observable back, and you just put it as one of the entry items in their selector for a local store, and it just provides the value there as well. Remember, it can take other selectors or any observable really, and store select gives you that observable. Okay, so now we have bananas as well that we haven't wired up yet. Let's see what happens. Okay, and this is what I wanted to show as well. This is one another cool feature, probably the last one that I'm gonna show for today. Okay, so now we can have apples. It should do, if everything works fine, apples, oranges, bananas, apples, oranges, bananas. How about, so we tied our bananas to it, but what if we want to stop listening for bananas now? We want to stop bananas. Like right now it doesn't work, right? Obviously, because bananas is an observable that's being passed to it. We know the entire state is destroyed when we go in here. So when we switch off this component, we're stop listening for any apples or bananas or oranges. But what about if I want to stop before my local state is destroyed? How can I do that? Well, The cool thing is that both reducer or updater or effect provide you back a subscription to that particular thing when you pass into this here. So okay, so let's just create a read-only subscription, and since this one returns me subscription, I can use it. So I'll do subscription. Actually, this would be this subscription. All right, and now I have a subscription, and when I press this button, it would click the stop bananas, and in here I can do with this subscription and subscribe. All right, let's see if it works. So we have our book that keeps undecided what wants apples, oranges, or bananas, and it still works. So all of it works, apple, orange, bananas. So we can stop bananas, and now we get only oranges or apples. So we continue to listen to the previous ones, and we stop listening for bananas. Pretty cool, huh? If we want to, add multiple, we can obviously aggregate all subscriptions within a single subscription and be done with that. Okay, so that was the last demo that I had for today. I wanted to showcase a lot of the features, how when you start actually using local state or component state in the more complex scenarios, how you can use a lot of things from it, we saw how we can update the state either by passing a single value, or if we're passing the observable, we show how we react to those changes and push it to the component back. We've seen how each book, for example, it has its own state, but then independently, but then author, for example, has its own local state, but all of its children have access to that state as well, which they can extract things from it. They can also invoke some of the effects on the parents as well. So there are multiple use cases. Hopefully this example was complex enough that you see all this benefits. And our bookstore is really simple. Our book component is really simple. Our author component is quite simple as well. Very simple, very straightforward. So hopefully that works. So right now we can also answer questions. We have a bunch of open questions which we're trying to decide, and hopefully from getting all of your feedback within a week or two, we'll finalize this. Some of the interesting questions were, could we set the state lazily, right? Because right now we are basically setting state right away when component is created. It's created and set the state. So yeah, we can do that. Yeah.
So just to add, Alex, one question. I mean, I think this use case is pretty much fit into one of the use cases which I was thinking about, having a data grid which handles its own state, including filter, pagination, everything, right? So earlier we had to put all the data into a global state, even though we don't need to read all those data. So it can avoid that scenario, right, where we had to actually put all the data into global state and then apply filter and sorting. Rather than that, we can just have a component which handles its own state. We don't need that data to be shared globally anyways.
Yeah, it's actually a very frequent example. Data tables or even graphs, there you have multiple sliders or triggers, different views. Basically, and you can have multiple of those graphs as well. This was one of the use cases where we're like, oh, we really need this, right?
Yeah.
And pushing all of it, especially some of this pushing to the global state where it won't be used anywhere just to be indexed by. It was harder to mentally justify some of those things. So we try to have this clearer separation. And mind you, we have this now. We have not exactly this version, a little bit a simpler version of ComponentStore in Firebase for over half a year now. So it's sort of picking up. Different teams are starting using it as well. So that's why I felt, hey, we're actually about the time where we probably want to push it upstream. So instead of everybody reinventing the wheel, we can use this nicely. But one other thing I want to highlight is, while you can extend ComponentStore within component itself, it really shines when it's extracted as a separate class that has that kind of interface that knows how to do it. So both reducer and effect know how to change state, how to transition from one to another, how to use new value, and then it provides to the component just a callback. It's like, hey, give me the value, I know how to do it. Or give me an observable, I'll listen for it, and we'll use all those values from it to update my state or to trigger new effects. So this API, this separation is what I find the most helpful and useful for me. What do you guys feel, Brendan?
Yeah, I like the API. Like I said, it gives you flexibility as far as whether you want to use it in a component, if it's simple enough, or if you want to abstract it into a service. And you're not, what also part of it is you're not bringing in a lot of RX JS under the hood. You're going to bring in like a behavior subject and maybe a couple of operators as far as the library is concerned, but it's pretty lightweight and allows you to build some stuff on top of it. So I like that part about it.
And the frequent question was like, well, how would you debounce? How would you do this? How would you do that? Well, again, I think it's quite straightforward. For example, if you want to debounce before you update the value within your local state, right? That's your effect. You push the value, you would debounce because now you're in the RX world. You would debounce it, and then you will send to service or even update, right? What if you want to debounce when you read from it, right? What do you don't, you got the new value, but only you want to read it right away. Well, selectors are still providing you an observable. Just pipe it and debounce, or even if you create another selector that does it. So it's completely fine to do that. And so there's all the mechanisms to use all of the RxJS magic whichever way you want. You just have to understand if it's incoming data or is it outgoing data, and you can apply all the operators you want.
What about like partial updates? I know that even the set state is you have to provide the entire shape of it again, but it'd be pretty straightforward enough to do a partial, right?
I don't. So partial in terms of, what do you mean like partial? You just want partial? Well, we do partial still. We spread the previous one. I don't want to. I'm
not saying we should have. I'm not saying we should have that, but I'm just saying if you wanted to create your own one that took in a partial of the state and it did the merging underneath, you could do that, right?
Yeah. One thing that's completely missing here on purpose is there's no string selectors or anything that we refer to properties by strings. There are a few reasons for it. The main reason is while TypeScript can handle the typing for it, it can probably look that you have that property on your interface and stuff like that. So TypeScript can handle that. For example, advanced JavaScript optimizers do not know that the property that you have there is the same as you have an interface, and because it treats strings as strings, and properties, it does property renaming. So for example, property like author would be minimized and renamed to like A or something like that. And then you have a string that you're trying to access the object by author, and you now have an A. There's a miscommunication there, and in optimized mode you would fail. I realized that not a lot of companies using such optimizers. They using some optimizers, but property renaming is an additional feature. But for example, almost all of the Google's JavaScript is property renamed. So that helps further save on the bundle size of JavaScript, because at runtime, browser doesn't care if it's A whatever, right? And if it's in prod mode, we're trying to ship the minimum number of bytes to the customer. So that's why there's no like string accessing. It's no string selectors, no reference to anything by string at all. Question from Sherkan is, do you think about releasing an agnostic as well? The agnostic one will just remove the onDestroy. In theory, we can just remove onDestroy and be fine with that. This is something that I think we'll have to discuss with the Direct team. And technically you can, nothing would stop you really, right? So it's up to you if you want to, but then you have to be aware that you would lose some of the features if it's obviously non-Angular. For example, Angular explicitly calls ng-on-destroy. Other framework which you'll be using this, or if you will be using is, you'd have to explicitly call the ng-on-destroy or something like that. One other thing that I didn't touch, I think, in any of this is I'm also, let me scroll, let me transition here. This is the component store itself. We are providing the destroy hook, basically, not a hook, but observable, right? So if you want to tie some of your stuff, other stuff, to, to the destruction, you don't need to basically have your destroy by yourself, because this happens in so many components right now, where you create this replace subject or subject and on destroy, and you do take until this. You are just having it right away by yourself. So if you want to start your own, and it's not tied to the component store, you can just use it easily. For example, a book component here has its own things going, like this timer, for example. If this timer wasn't attached here, right, for example, but we want to make sure it's destroyed when the component is destroyed, because otherwise it's just sticking. We can easily do take until yeah, it's a lot slower. And then this book store destroy, right? So you have that going, so you can easily do this. Okay, now I realize, wow, it's really okay, good, boom. So you have that. So if you want to have your own, observables and tie it to the component destruction, because bookstore is tied to the component destruction. There you have it. One thing I also didn't tell is that when you have this store, make sure it's not provided in root. A lot of snippets and generators will provide you in root right away, because they are component scope providers. Component scope services don't provide it in root. In root, create a singletons. We want them to be per component. Yeah.
We could look at, I'd have to look at this some more, because I don't completely understand how they work yet, though. But the new injectable provided in like any would maybe work here. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I didn't look into that yet.
I'm pretty sure there's like an Angular in-depth article on it, but I had to go back and read it again.
Yeah, nice.
Or an in-depth article, excuse me.
I wonder if we have any. So hold on, let me just do this. Oh yeah, we guys doing this already. There you go. Yes, it's better. Do we have any other interesting questions in this tree? Because we are pretty much almost done. We started.
Yeah, I didn't see any other. Well, the other question was a couple of questions, but they're more for optimizers. Does an optimizer really rename a string argument to a function? And the other one was about making it framework agnostic.
Yeah, so about the optimizer. So property renaming optimizer, it goes by the properties, right? And it basically renames them to something else. Because it knows everywhere this property is used, it would rename it to the same thing everywhere, except for when these properties are referenced by a string. So for example, if I do the bookstore update title here and it renames the update title, it knows how to do it. However, if I do the bookstore and I just call it by this, like this, past the update title, it won't know what it is, right? Because yes, it's a property that exists and it's a callable. Basically, it should work. But compiler treats this as a string. It's like, okay, I don't touch strings. I don't optimize strings because strings could be different things. See, I mean, there's no errors in JavaScript and it all works. However, optimizer would not know how to treat this. And when we pass properties as a strings, that's exactly what we do, because we would use those strings when we call them. And here I should note that yes, there are ways we can tell the GS optimizer compiler that this string is actually a property from somewhere else, but we're more telling it that, hey, this bookstore, do not rename anything for this bookstore because we know some of the things are being used somewhere else. So we can let it know, but again, the goal is to have the minimal JS size as we can and not even think about it. So access like this is pretty much out of our reach anyway, if we want to have the best performance in the property renaming compilers. And the second question was what other questions?
The other questions was about making it framework agnostic, about removing the Angular dependency.
Yeah. I mean, we can. Basically, the only dependency is interface of on this ng and destroy. So technically, it doesn't cost anything for us to remove it. We'll just have to make a decision as a team if we want to remove it. Because basically, now it's framework agnostic, and it would still work if I save it. I'm gonna save it here too. Whatever I was doing there, it still destroys everything. So okay, it's not recompiling. So we go demo, reloading. Yeah. So I mean, it still works. Demo 1, like everything would work. And right, if we change things, go back. It's destroying it properly. So I don't know. Could be. What other things?
Yeah, we'll take on that one. We'll see. We'll see how much it would add or take away from our primary use case, I believe so.
Will a tree shaking happen for the store if it's lazily loaded feature module component as usual? Will the tree shaking happen for the store if the lazy loaded feature module component as usual? So, I'm not quite sure I understand the question. Can you rephrase it?
I guess if you don't, even if you're using it in some places, say you have a lazy loading module and you aren't using it there, it won't be included in the bundle of that module, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yes. It will be only used, yeah. Think of it as just a regular service, because it is a regular service. It's a regular service that that is tied to the component and its lifecycle. One of the things, back to the bottom, I think we had a few of open questions. Yeah, thanks, good. That I wanted to touch on. So first of all, I think we're settling that it should be in a new package. I mean, it's completely independent. Tying it up with other initiative with the push and let, I don't think it'd be beneficial, because it doesn't have anything in common, and even if we remove this on destroy, now it's framework agnostic. So maybe it would still this. Any other thoughts on this? So yeah, looks like this is the package. We still have a discuss it within the team, if this is what we're gonna go with. So far, I have a feeling that likely that's what we're gonna go with. All right, and then the naming. This was quite controversial. Initially, and even within this design proposal, they were all written as, let me just present this quickly here. So I'm at the open questions in the design doc. Design doc should be also linked. Yes, it's linked in the video as well at the bottom. So the naming was like, do we want to go with a reducer, selector, and effect? And pros that I felt that reducer is a fairly established concept, and the more I was thinking about it, even the React has, use reducer, hook, and stuff like that. So it's kind of more intuitive now what it does. Selector or select as well, and effect. The create, although it does create those because you can call them after, right, with the values. I'm afraid this would be conflicting with some of the imports, because these methods are available right there on the service itself, while these are just functions within the global nginx store. So you might by accident import one from global store and be confused why it's not working. So having a little bit of name separation, I think, would be better. Right now I've used updater throughout the whole thing here.
Yeah, I also think if we go down the path of naming over, I think like actions and a reducer kind of are implicitly like tied to each other. So even if a reducer is taking in some state and returning a new state, usually if you're using that terminology, you're thinking of a reducer and dispatching some action to, trigger that change in the state. So
yeah, maybe in that sense, and we're getting some feedback in the live stream as well that updater is a little bit more intuitive. Yeah, maybe updater, and this is because that's where we went. I think the hybrid naming is getting the most attention. Having the updater, selector, and effect is kind of I think maybe updater, select. No, but it's still selector. So I don't know. Selector if it was a function. Actually, I adjusted this one not to return a function, because the original proposal was returning a function, and again there's like few changes here. This is a original one which was returning the function call that returns observable. You can always wrap it with a function. I think that was Brendan's point. Yeah, you're right. So maybe it's better that way. I did it mostly for testing purposes and for if I get undefined in the templates, sometimes it's a bit harder to find which ones exactly.
We just didn't want like Ward to be like shouting at the sky when he has to create a function for everything. So
Yeah. Yeah. So updater selector or select. I don't know. Select. Do a selector. Do we want selector or select effect?
we can talk about this. I like select. I think that was mentioned before, but I was going back to the old store.select days, which I think a lot of people probably like. So
Yeah, yeah. So this is the selector we just I touched a little bit upon. And again, these are open questions in a design doc, so everybody can look at them and provide their opinion either here or at the GitHub issue that we have for this proposal.
Yep.
So memoized or not, again, this is lower priority. If anything, we can integrate it further. Although we'll see if it makes sense. It's already distinct until change. So we really are we really trying to hide the complex or heavy computational things. So we'll see. And then one of this was, should we add the get state imperatively? So we can set things right now, right? But our selectors only provide observables.
No.
Yeah. So the problem, there are different problems with this. First of all, when the get state, you'll call get state, you won't be getting that state from the selectors. Selectors return observables. That's it. So, but you can probably get state from the local state itself, right? From that behavior subject. Behavior subject that's underneath there right now has the value, right? You can basically read it from that. We're just not exposing that. So it won't be from selectors. It will be only from the state, pure state itself. So that's already losing some of the values. And also, it might promote those non-reactive bad practices and that lead to issues and confusion and all that.
We like to call those foot guns.
Yeah, exactly. Santosh, do you have any opinions on any of the ones that we already discussed, or?
No, I'm good. Actually, I was just discussing with some other guys. So I'm very bad at naming things. The last good thing which I named is my daughter. So
that's good. Yeah. One more item that sort of popped up, and again, this one was influenced by Rx state. There are a few actually things influenced by Rx state. One was something that we implemented already, which was add a reactive way to push data in the component store. So initial proposal, updater was only taking values. It wasn't able to take observables. And then I adjusted it to take observables as well, because, well, why not, right? I mean, there are good use cases for it. So that was implemented and added. It was really tiny addition, but it was a good one and inspired by Michael Hotke's RX state. And this one kind of is like, should we add a lazy initialization as well? So for example, none of the selectors will trigger until you set the state, or either set state or update the state first. Because when you do the set state or you update state, you basically need to provide satisfy the entire interface, right? So you can do it right away there in the constructor itself. Sure. You might forget, but I mean, eventually you set it anyway. So this is one of those things like, should we have it or not? Maybe, I don't know. I never had too much problem with having a null value or initial undefined values. Should we have those selectors or view model hold off from? Okay.
Thanks, Alex.
All right, yeah, give me a second. Oh, we're back in live stream right now. We have 3 people watching. I guess it's 3 of us. But anyhow, yeah, thanks so much for joining us for this demos and overview. I hope it answers some of the use cases. It showcases how it could be used, what the good sides and the bad sides of it are. Hopefully, there's no bad sides. Yeah, thank you for joining.
Do you plan to release those demos eventually on ngrx.io documentation or something?
Yeah, I think some of the proposal itself would be reused for the IO documentation. And again, I need to get approvals from majority of the team to proceed with this. So, because we're still looking at this, and there are probably possible other alternatives which we need to evaluate as well. But we'll definitely once we decide which version of it would go in, we'll add documentations and all that for the ngrx.io site, definitely.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and yeah, send us questions if you have any questions. Send us questions on Twitter, or leave the questions or suggestions in the ngrx and the GitHub. Thank you.
Yep. All right. See ya.